Every generation inherits the world the last one built. Boomers got highways, pensions, and cheap houses. The generations after them got the invoice. Here's what that invoice actually looks like. A 28-year-old today working full-time is handing over nearly half of their paycheck to a government that is spending more than it collects. That same 28-year-old cannot buy the house their parents bought at 24. Not because they're irresponsible, because that house now costs 11 times what they earn. They're not renting because they want to. They're renting because the door to ownership was sold to investors while they were still in school. They are delaying children, not because they don't want them, but because bringing a child into financial instability feels like a cruelty they're not willing to commit. And the system that produced all this, it's pointing at them, calling them lazy, calling them entitled, telling them to work harder, spend less, and stop complaining. This video is for everyone, boomers, millennials, Gen Z, and every generation watching this unfold. Because this isn't a generational war, it's a generational reckoning. And understanding what actually happened, how we got here, who made these decisions, and what comes next, is the only chance any of us can come out of this happy. But before we talk about the invoice, we need to talk about the jackpot. Because what the boomer generation inherited wasn't just luck. It was the single greatest economic setup in human history. And understanding exactly how good it was is the only way to understand exactly how bad it got. In 1950, the Western world was rebuilding. Governments were spending massively on infrastructure, education, and housing. Interest rates were low, land was cheap, unions were strong. A factory worker could buy a house on a single income in 3 to 5 years of savings. The same house today would take that worker's grandchild 40 years. The GI Bill in America alone sent 8 million veterans to college for free and subsidized millions of home purchases at low interest rates. In Canada, Britain, and Australia, similar programs created an entire generation of first-time homebuyers practically overnight. Governments weren't just enabling prosperity. They were manufacturing it and handing it directly to one specific generation at the exact moment they needed it most. Then came the 1980s, and a set of decisions that would define everything that came after. Thatcher in Britain, Reagan in America. The pivot to deregulation, privatization, and dismantling of the systems that had created the prosperity the boomers enjoyed. The reasoning was seductive. Free markets create more wealth than governments can distribute. Let the economy breathe. Cut taxes, let the growth do the rest. And for the people already inside the system, already inside the house, already in the pension, already holding assets, it worked beautifully. Asset prices exploded. Property values tripled, quadrupled, quintupled. Stock markets surged. The boomers who owned things watched everything they owned become worth dramatically more. The people who didn't own anything yet, they were able to try and buy into a market that had just been inflated by the generation ahead of them. That's not a conspiracy. That's not malice. That's timing. But timing at this scale has consequences that last for decades. So, that was how the jackpot was built. Now let's look at what was left behind when the party ended. Because the invoice isn't just about house prices. It's about something much deeper. A fundamental rewiring of who the economy actually works for. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let's go through the invoice, not as a political argument, as a balance sheet. Picture a 28-year-old named Marcus. He earns $65,000 a year. He works hard, shows up early, does everything right. By the time every layer of tax is collected, income tax, payroll tax, sales tax, consumption tax, he takes home about $38,000. He lives in a city where the average rent is $2,200 a month. After rent, Marcus has $11,600 left for the entire year. For food, transport, clothing, savings, any kind of life worth living. Marcus is not poor by government definitions. Marcus is trapped. Now multiply Marcus by tens of millions. That is the taxation reality of an entire generation in the Western world. A young worker in Germany, France, Canada, or the UK pays between 40 and 50% of their income in combined taxes. That money flows into a system where the largest single expenditure in almost every Western country is not education, not infrastructure, not investment in the future. It's retirement benefits and healthcare for the elderly. In the United States in 2024, Social Security and Medicare alone consumed 46 cents of every federal dollar spent. In Canada, age-related transfers represent the fastest growing segment of federal spending. In the UK, the state pension costs more than the entire education budget. This is not an argument against caring for the elderly. It's an observation for who's paying for it, and whether the people paying for it will ever receive the same in return. The trust funds are depleted. The demographics don't work. The generation paying in today is financing a retirement system they will never collect from at the same rate. They are paying for a safety net that will never catch them. Meet Sarah. She's 31, she has a master's degree, a stable job, and has been saving for 6 years. She has $40,000 set aside, more disciplined than most people twice her age. In the city where she works, the average home costs $780,000. Her $40,000 doesn't cover the down payment. It doesn't even cover half the down payment. She has done everything she was told to do, and the door is still closed. Her mother bought a house at 27 on a single teacher's salary. Sarah is starting to understand that the world her mother navigated and the world she's living in are not the same world. In 1970, the average home in the United States cost 2.3 times the average annual salary. Today, it costs 7.5 times. In Sydney, London, and Vancouver, it costs between 12 and 15 times. This is not a natural market movement. This is the direct result of policy decisions. Low interest rates held artificially low for decades. Tax incentives that made property investment more profitable than productive investment. And zoning bylaws written by homeowners who had every financial incentive to restrict new supply and protect the value of what they already own. Boomers didn't just benefit from cheap property. Many of them, through local councils, through political donations, through the simple act of voting for politicians who promised to protect home values, actively participated in making it more expensive for everyone who came after them. Your home doubling in value sounds like success. From the other side of the transaction, it looks like a door being closed. Daniel is 24. He has never voted in a federal election. He wasn't old enough when most of the decisions that shaped his financial reality were made. He didn't vote for the tax cuts of the 1980s. He didn't vote for the bank bailouts of 2008. He didn't vote for the stimulus packages of 2020. He wasn't in the room for any of it. But he will spend the most productive decades of his working life to pay for all of it, with interest. Every dollar a government borrows today is a dollar a future taxpayer must repay with interest. Between 1980 and 2026, the United States federal debt went from $1 trillion to almost $40 trillion. The UK national debt as a percentage of GDP doubled. Canada, Australia, France, the same story everywhere. This debt was accumulated primarily to fund current consumption, tax cuts that disproportionately benefited asset owners, wars, bailouts of financial institutions, and maintenance of welfare states designed for a demographic reality that no longer exists. The people who voted for politicians who borrowed this money are now retiring. The people who will spend their working lives repaying it were in primary school when most of it was signed. That is the invoice, and it arrives every single paycheck. Lisa is 33. She wants children. She has always wanted children since she was a little girl. She and her partner have had the conversation dozens of times, run the numbers, looked at childcare costs, looked at rent, looked at what maternity leave actually pays versus what their landlord actually charges. Every time they run the numbers, the answer comes back the same. Not yet. Maybe next year. And next year becomes the year after. And the window gets smaller. Lisa is not selfish. Lisa is doing math. For the first time in recorded peacetime history, young people in developed nations are voluntarily opting out of having children at scale. Birth rates across Western Europe, North America, and East Asia have fallen below replacement level. Not because of cultural decay, not because young people are selfish, but because the economic calculation of raising a child has become, for millions of people, genuinely impossible to justify. When housing consumes 40 to 50% of your income, when childcare costs more than rent, when job security no longer exists the way it did for your parents, when you are already carrying student debt into your 30s, the decision to not have children is not a lifestyle choice. It is a rational economic response to an irrational economic environment. And the cruel irony is this: the birth rate collapse will make everything worse. Fewer workers means less tax revenue. Less tax revenue means less capacity to fund the retirement and the healthcare system already underfunded. The very conditions causing young people to opt out of having children are the conditions their absence will intensify. The system is eating itself, and it started the moment we stopped investing in the people who were supposed to sustain it. So that's the invoice. Housing, taxation, debt, and the birth rate telling us, in the clearest economic language possible, that something has gone fundamentally wrong. But here's the question nobody wants to answer. What happens next? Because this isn't a story without an ending. History has seen versions of this before, and the three paths that come after, reform, stagnation, or rupture, are not equally likely. One of them is already happening, and once I show you which one, look at the city you live in and tell me you don't already recognize it. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes loudly. Every time society has concentrated wealth in one generation while leaving the next with diminishing prospects, one of three things has happened: reform, stagnation, or rupture. Reform looks like the New Deal, like the post-war welfare state, like deliberate, politically difficult decisions to redistribute opportunity through housing supply, through tax restructuring, through investment in the young, rather than protection of the old. It requires the generation in power to voluntarily relinquish some of its advantage for the stability of the whole. It has happened. It is rare. Stagnation looks like Japan, a society so locked into protecting existing asset values and existing power structures that it simply stops moving. Birth rates collapse. Growth stalls. Young people withdraw from careers, from relationships, from civic life. The country becomes a museum of prosperity it can no longer reproduce. Polite, orderly, slowly hollowing out. Look around you right now. Look at the city you grew up in. Look at the jobs available to your generation versus your parents' generation. Look at how many of your friends have quietly stopped talking about buying a house, stopped talking about having kids, stopped talking about the future at all. Not because they gave up, but because maintaining hope for something that keeps moving further away starts to feel like a form of self-harm. Ask yourself honestly, does any of this feel familiar? Because if it does, you're not imagining it, and you're not alone. Rupture looks like every political earthquake of the last decade. Brexit, Trump, the rise of anti-establishment movements across Europe. The collapse of trust, an institution once considered permanent. When a generation feels the contract has been broken, that playing by the rules leads nowhere, they stop playing by the rules. Not violently, not immediately, but incrementally in ways that reshape everything. We are already in the early stages of rupture. The question is whether it deepens or whether something interrupts it. And this is where the video stops being history and starts being a conversation about right now. Because the boomers who are watching this, and some of you are because you clicked on a video called Boomers Won and everyone else got the invoice, and you're still here. Which means you are the ones who actually want to understand. You are not powerless in this. The political power your generation holds is enormous. The wealth your generation holds represents the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in human history, an estimated $84 trillion moving from boomers to their children over the next 2 decades. How that transfer happens matters enormously. Whether it moves through structures that protect the already wealthy, or whether your generation uses its remaining political window to widen the door for people who have no wealthy parents, that is still being decided, right now. In elections, in council meetings, in the quiet act of deciding which politicians deserve your vote. The most powerful thing a boomer can do right now is say, out loud, to the young people in their life, I know the world I'm handing you is harder than the one I received. I benefited from systems that made your path steeper, and I'm going to vote, advocate, and act like that actually matters. Not because it erases what happened, but because the alternative is leaving the people you love to navigate a system you helped build without ever acknowledging what it cost them. That is integrity, and it is the only thing that moves this from rupture to reform. And for the younger people watching, the millennials carrying the debt, the Gen Z workers watching the housing market from the outside, the young men and women quietly doing the math on whether they can afford a family, this is not a call to anger. Anger without direction is just noise. This is a call to clarity, to understand the system well enough to stop blaming yourself for outcomes that were engineered long before you arrived. The house isn't affordable because you bought too much coffee. The pension won't be there because the math was broken 40 years ago. The tax burden is what it is because people who set the rates already bought their houses and funded their retirements. You were not failing the system. The system failed its obligation to you. And knowing that is the beginning of doing something about it. Every generation inherits the world the last one built. The question that defines the next 20 years is simple. What kind of world are we building for the ones who come after us? Because right now, the answer the numbers are giving is not one any of us should be comfortable with.